When we think about how elections work, it's usually pretty simple. The person with the most votes wins, the person with fewer votes loses. But what if I told you there's a place where it's not quite that clear-cut? We're about to dive into Singapore's unique political system. And trust me, it's built on a paradox that seems like it just shouldn't be possible. So let's just get right to the big, mind-bending question at the heart of it all. How can you win a seat in parliament by losing an election? It sounds like a riddle, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And yet, it's not a riddle. It's real. This is exactly what happens in Singapore. Candidates who are the official losers in their local race can, and often do, get awarded a seat in the national parliament.
Okay, so how on earth is that possible? Well, it all comes down to a really fascinating and frankly kind of bizarre concept known as the best loser system. The official term you need to know is Non-Constituency Member of Parliament, or NCMP for short. These are seats that are specifically set aside for the highest performing losing candidates from opposition parties. Basically, if you lose, but you manage to lose by a smaller margin than the other opposition candidates who also lost, you might just get a seat anyway. Now, to really get this, you have to look at where it came from. The ruling party, the People's Action Party, or PAP, created this thing back in 1984. But here's the wild part. They didn't do it from a position of weakness. They did it from a position of absolute total dominance. After winning pretty much every single seat for years, they used that power to voluntarily guarantee seats for their opponents. Why would they do that? Well, as you can imagine, this created two completely opposite ways of looking at it. The PAP argues that it's a fantastic democratic feature, guaranteeing an opposition voice to sharpen debate. But the opposition, they see it as a total trap, a clever way to create the facade of democracy while keeping them powerless.
Let's look at the PAP's argument in action. So in 2015, the opposition Workers' Party got nearly 13% of the national vote. But because of how the elections are structured, they only won under 7% of the seats. The PAP says, see, by adding these best loser seats, we bring their representation in parliament closer to their actual share of the vote. It's more proportional. But the opposition argues these seats are a poison chalice. For one, these NCMPs don't represent a specific district, which makes it hard to connect with voters. Plus, get this, they're paid almost 7 times less than a regular MP. They say the whole system is just a smokescreen to distract from the real problems, like gerrymandering and impossibly short 9-day campaigns that keep the playing field tilted. But that's just the argument on the surface. There's a deeper, much more strategic, some might even say cynical, reason this whole system was created. And it all comes down to the fear of something called a freak election. To understand this, you first have to understand the Singaporean voter. Polls consistently show that a huge majority, maybe 75% of the population, approves of the PAP government. And you can see why. They've overseen one of the biggest economic miracles in modern history. But here's the paradox. There's this massive gap between their sky-high approval ratings and how many votes they actually get. They might have 75% approval, but in 2011, for instance, they only got about 60% of the vote. So what's going on there? The theory is that voters are using what's called a safe protest vote. They're actually happy with the PAP and want them to stay in power, but they also vote for the opposition to send a message. It's a way of keeping the ruling party on its toes, to stop them from getting too complacent. And this leads directly to the PAP's ultimate nightmare, the freak election. This is the scenario where just a few too many people cast that safe protest vote, and they all accidentally vote the PAP out of power, even though that's not what most of them actually wanted to happen. So, the best loser system was the PAP's brilliant solution to this problem. It's basically an insurance policy. The government is saying to the voters, look, you want an opposition voice in parliament? Fine, we'll guarantee it for you. Now you don't need to risk a protest vote to get one. But this didn't just solve a problem. Oh no. It created this absolutely fascinating, high-stakes political chess match between the ruling party and the opposition. The PAP's move was to double down. They increased the number of guaranteed opposition seats all the way to 12. The idea was that this would make voters feel secure and finally stop casting protest votes. But it didn't really work. The PAP's vote share just kept on its slow, steady decline, which suggested voters wanted a real opposition, not just a government-appointed one. And the opposition? They thought back strategically. They decided to reject the terms of this game entirely. Their goal wasn't to be the best loser. It was to actually win elections on a level playing field.
So they pulled off this incredibly clever move. In the 1991 election, the opposition parties made a pact to only contest 49% of the available seats in parliament. Now, think about the genius of this. By only running for 49% of the seats, they made it mathematically impossible for the PAP to lose their majority. A freak election couldn't happen. This made it safe again for voters to cast their ballot for the opposition, brilliantly turning the PAP's own logic completely against them.
This strange back and forth is all part of a much bigger question about what kind of political system Singapore actually has. And this best loser system isn't just an isolated quirk. You see other rules, like group constituencies and a uniquely powerful presidency that all follow a similar pattern. The ruling party justifies them as features that create stability, while the opposition argues they're just clever ways to tilt the playing field. This all boils down to two fundamentally different ways of looking at democracy. The PAP argues that if voters keep choosing them for 60 years because they're good at governing, hey, that's democracy at work. But the opposition counters that a real democracy must have the real possibility of a transfer of power. A hypothetical threat just isn't enough. So, that leaves us with a final big question. Is Singapore's system a flawed democracy that's slowly and messily evolving toward more competition? Or is it a finely tuned, highly advanced model of authoritarianism that has learned to use the language and tools of democracy to ensure permanent one-party rule? It's a paradox worth thinking about.